All right, so as you all know, every Wednesday we focus on a story of somebody who has been wrongfully convicted and they are now exonerated or fighting to be exonerated. But today we have a different story. Sometimes in the Exonerated series, I want to focus on stories that we can impact and help now just by spreading the word. So I want to bring on a friend of the show. He is an exoneree. He spent 10 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. He's been on before. Mr. Jared Adams, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Clay. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate being here.
Oh, thank you so much. So, for folks that don't know, Jared is an author, and he's also an attorney specializing in criminal defense, civil rights, and wrongful conviction cases in state and federal courts. So, you are representing two heartbreaking cases in Virginia: Terrence Richardson and Ferrone Claiborne. This is a bizarre. I've covered some crazy cases. This is really bizarre. They are accused of killing a police officer, a white police officer. This area of Virginia, it's Waverly, Virginia, correct? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Has a long history of racism. And they were found innocent, yet a judge still sentenced them to life in prison. So, briefly explain these two cases and why it's so important that we're aware of it. And of course, like I said, you're representing them.
Well, look, again, I want to thank you. And the case is a legal conundrum. So I want to do my best to break it down so followers and listeners can understand. These two men were accused of killing a police officer in Waverly, Virginia in 1998. They were facing the death penalty. The case itself was stalling because from the prosecutor at the time, he kept saying that he was struggling to get the evidence that he needed to support the accusation and the conviction. And so what they ended up doing was they ended up taking the advice of counsel to plead guilty to charges that are absolutely unheard of. For Terrence Richardson, he pled guilty to a manslaughter charge. For Ferrone Claiborne, he pled guilty to accessory after fact. Ferrone received a 1-year suspended sentence. Terrence received a 5-year suspended sentence where he had to do 2 years in state custody. And I want to pause there because when the prosecutor, went out to the public and is saying that he doesn't have the evidence he needed to support the conviction, it wasn't because the evidence was hard to come by. It was because the evidence pointed to someone else all along, and the authorities failed to turn that evidence over to the prosecutor. So while these men are now in one's in state prison, the other one's trying to put his life back together, the feds were investigating the case because they were requested to by the family because they didn't have any idea, the family, why they received the lenient charges. The feds ended up bringing drug charges against Terrence and Ferrone in order to bring the same murder accusation in federal court. And these drug charges were absolutely unfounded and supported by nothing more but testimony of people who had insensitive lie and who were trying to get rid of drug charges on their own. They go to federal court where they are tried for this murder. And in the Fed's theory of the case is the murder happened as a result of a drug conspiracy that these guys were operating for 10 years. So the jury heard the evidence, Clay. They found these men not guilty of having anything to do with the murder of Officer Gibson. They found him guilty of one single drug count, and my best guess is that they based this on nothing but testimony, where they would have stood to be sentenced to only 10 to 15 years in prison. These men were sentenced to life by the judge, and he based it on the state court guilty pleas, despite the jury finding them not guilty of Officer Gibson's murder.
Yeah, Jared, I don't think I've ever heard a story like this. A jury finds them not guilty, and the judge decides to sentence them anyway. And I want people to know the officer was killed April 25th, 1998, in Waverly, Virginia. Happens to be a white officer. Now, do I have this right? At the time, this is a predominantly black town, and they put in a black police chief. Is that accurate? To kind of, there were people who were upset that this
Yeah.
predominantly black town had this white police department. They put in this black police chief, and this police chief says that these two men did not commit this crime. But the powers that be, the white police officer is shot. It appears they want to convict somebody and anybody. How do Terrence Richardson and Ferrone Claiborne, how do their names even get involved in this? There's no physical evidence whatsoever.
None.
Nothing. They have airtight alibis. How do their names even get caught up in this?
So here's what happens, and this is, you'll hear me say historical a lot because that's what we're dealing with in terms of the issues that we have with our justice system. So what the police did in their investigation is what they historically do in these investigations, especially when it involves the Black and brown impoverished communities. So they round up, Clay, a bunch of people, right? And it's who says something after I press a button, and whatever button that is, whatever they say, then that's what we end up going with. That's how Terrence and Ferrone's name came up, and it came up because another guy was facing some criminal charges in another case. He was just spewing out names, but what I really believe, like sold it for the officers when they landed on Terrence and Ferrone was this: Terrence and Ferrone could not afford the voices and the resources that was needed to defend against this. And that is something that happens synonymously in our communities every day. And let me tell you what they do, Clay, to divide and conquer. When they accuse us, and this is historically what happens, when they accuse us of doing something, they use the worst of the worst accusations to divide and conquer our supporters from us. So it isolates us to fight against the accusations by themselves. Instead of us saying, what were they accused of? We often get to what did they do, when we should not leap that far, and we should look at the facts of the case and follow that direction.
Now, is it Terrence that took the guilty plea because it was Terrence, correct? Who took the guilt? No, I'm sorry.
It was Terrence. It was Terrence and Ferrone. They both pled guilty, and the reason they did, I think that before Ava DuVernay did such a magical job explaining how you could be in a situation where even though as strong as you think you are, you will plead guilty to something you didn't do. That explains what happened with Terrence and Ferrone. On average, in Virginia, people were on death row for 5 to 7 years. So that meant that if their appeal failed and they went to trial and was found guilty, Clay, I can appeal a life sentence. I cannot appeal if they put you to death with the needle.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's why
I want folks to understand that. I've covered these cases so many times where somebody pleads guilty because they have to. They're pressured. They're terrified, and there's the threat of the death penalty. You have pressure by your team, by police, and so on. Now, I want to just make sure folks understand this because I know it's going to confuse listeners. So again, they're in a court of law. A jury finds them not guilty. But the judge says, well, we're going to find you guilty on state charges of drug charges and sentences them to life. How is that legal that a court finds them, a jury of your alleged peers, finds you not guilty, and the judge says, well, I want to get you on something else, and I'm going to give you life in prison for it. Can you explain that? Just make it kind of plain for us how that possibly happens.
Here's if folks want to go look and do the heavy lifting research, it's U.S. versus Watts, United States versus Watts. It's a Supreme Court case that allows a judge the authority to enhance a person's sentence to life based on alleged conduct. Clay, if you're asking me, how does that not rob the citizen of his constitutional right to due process? I'm saying to you, it does, and I have no answer for that because that's exactly what it does. It is a case that was really implemented and found in the cloud of the O.J. Simpson trial. Back when O.J. was on trial, everyone's attention was focused on that case. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court was ruling on whether or not it was constitutionally correct to allow a court to sentence a person to life in prison based on accusations and not being found guilty. the Supreme Court, under this quiet cloud of the OJ trial, ruled that it was okay. And no one has challenged the law since, because predominantly, Clay, it affects majority people of color who are accused in these drug conspiracies in neighborhoods that you and I grew up in, where we know who the real drug dealer is. We know the drug dealer by his cars, by his clothes, by all of this. Meanwhile, some prosecutors and districts have used the conspiracy law and relevant conduct to eviscerate the Black community and continue to place the noose on the neck using these laws in sweeping fashion, where people are not kingpins. They are not lifelong drug dealers, but yet and still a judge, faced with them being found not guilty of certain charges, but found guilty of others, can enhance their sentence to life, and no one else, no one really knows at that point what to do to unravel it, because it takes so much to unwind that ball of yarn in the criminal court proceedings in the United States.
And Jared, I saw a clip, and even one of the jurors, who happened to be an older white woman, she was shocked. She was mortified that they were still sentenced when they were found not guilty. Correct?
She did, and I want folks to understand. We've spent 5 years investigating this case. We didn't just get to where we are right now, where I'm able to tell you thoroughly what happened to their case. So when we were able to get the information from the juror, Dawn White, she says no one, not just her, no one in the jury room thought they were ever guilty of murder and had anything to do with this officer's death. She said she had no idea that they were still in prison and that they could be sentenced to life based on the drug charges. And so it's again, what happens to the oppressed by the oppressor is only able to continue when no one talks about it. There's a reason why Dr. King said, I will remember not the actions of my enemies more than I remember the silence of my friends. When things go quietly done in our justice system, it allows the injustice to perpetuate and continue. And that's what's going on in this case. And I beg of those watching to go and support by signing the petition, because we have filed a pardon petition to the president, and we're asking the president to step in. When the president asked us as voters to support them, to get them into the office, we did so with the promise that our system, in the criminal justice system that it is, in the criminal system, I struggle when I say justice, we were promised that the criminal system would be attended to. This is a case to start. Joe Biden, I'm begging you to act.
So the reason why you're calling on Biden is because for folks, they might wonder, you're not calling on Governor Youngkin in Virginia, because the state charges they were found not guilty of. So it is the federal charges that this insidious judge found a way to indict them on. That's why you're calling on President Biden, correct?
So the procedural issue that they're in is this. Governor Youngkin can most certainly step in. But right now, there's some Supreme Court Virginia litigation that's going on. So right now isn't the proper time for him to step in. I think that well, let me first answer this, and then I'll tell you an important history of how this case got to where it is in the state court. So again, they pled guilty in state court because they were facing the death penalty and advised illogically by counsel to do so. They were found not guilty in federal court of the murder, but the judge used the state court guilty pleas and said, even though the jury found you not guilty in federal court, I believe you was there because you said you was by the state court guilty pleas. I'm sentencing you to life. So we filed an actual innocence petition in Virginia state courts that we just argued in the Supreme Court. So now we're just waiting to get that decision. But listen, before this argument, Attorney General Mark Herron took this case, and for 9 months, he investigated it with his office. He filed a 78-page brief in support that they get their actual innocence. The politics came and involved afterwards. In that November, Mark Herron lost his seat. A Republican came in by the name of Jason Myers. Jason Myers has run on nothing but pro-police, 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 even though my argument is Pro-police means good police. That's pro-police. If you protect bad police, that's anti, what you're arguing. So in that instance, he retracted the support of the actual innocence petition of our guys. He did so by saying simply that Mark Herring got it wrong. But when faced and pressed with the facts of the case and the fact that they were found not guilty, he could not come up with one single argument as to the facts of the case that support these guys' guilt. So what is he doing? He's protecting the police, because if you believe what the evidence is telling you in this case, that Terrence and Ferrone did not have anything to do with this murder, then you also have to believe that they were framed by the police, not because I said it, not because the evidence said it, but also because the Commonwealth attorney who did the actual prosecution and accepted the guilty plea of Terrence and Ferrone said he never received the evidence pointing to another suspect because it was withheld by the authorities.
So Ferrone Claiborne was arrested when he was 22 years old, April 28th, 1998. And Terrence Richardson was arrested when he was 27 years old, April 26th. Wow, that's my birthday. I turned 21 that year. April 26, 1998. How are they doing? How's their spirit? How's their soul?
It's tough, Clay. You know, when you go in there and you go inside and you visit these guys, and you see the hope in their eyes, right? And then you have to leave, and when you leave, each door clangs and bangs behind you, and you know that you're not just leaving a client or clients, you're leaving some innocent men who've been buried alive by nothing but lies. And it's difficult. I remember talking to Ferrone's dad after seeing him recently, and he told me, he said, you know, had I known that they was going to do this to my boy, I would have grabbed his hand and jumped out that second story window at a courtroom, because they sentenced both of us to death that day. It's tough, Clay, when they're going through family albums and they're spending time during the holidays. It's always an empty plate. You know, there's always, you know, photos up until and after Ferrone and Terrence were home. And that gap is not just in the gap of their lives. It's in the gaps of the lives of all who love them and all who care about them. So I pray to God that this case goes viral. I pray that we demand justice, because I want everyone to understand this explicitly. If you could be found not guilty and a judge can still sentence you to life based on the accusation, it's a slippery slope when it comes to freedom. We have to stand now.
So what can my audience do? Where is the petition? What else can they do? How can my audience be involved?
They can go and follow jaredadamslaw.com on like Instagram. They can go and follow Not Guilty Serving Life. It's a website, Instagram page created for them, and the petition is on that Instagram page. When we share the stories about the updates, the articles, share them, hashtag, tag, do whatever we need to do. I don't know why this is, but when it comes to the toughest issues in our society, when it comes to equity, equality, the justice system, we always get the attention when it comes time to vote. It's almost that time again. Stop giving away your power and your vote for nothing. We got to hold people accountable, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat. We were made promises. We want to see some of those promises come through. Terrence and Ferrone deserve that much. Their family, who's voted nothing but Democrat for years and years, and who taught their kids and their descendants to don't even ask questions, just vote Democrat. They deserve the Democratic support, because the Republicans in the Attorney General office in Virginia bust a move on them. Where's the support?
Right. And is there a petition?
There is a petition. The petition can be found on Not Guilty Serving Life. We already have, I want to say, Clay, we have about, I think we got about 250,000 already signed on the petition. We're trying to get that thing up as high as we possibly can and get the attention that this case deserves.
And let me ask you, I'm just curious, do you think this is on President Biden's radar? I mean, how do we make sure it's on his radar? Do you think this is on the radar for his team? I don't know how that works. Do you think it's on their radar?
I'll say this. There are two types of courts. There's the court of law and there's the court of public appeal. We've seen the court of public appeal sway and things get done. We have to put the same energy, effort, and that type of buzz on this office. This petition has been on their desk since October. Since October, it's been on their desk. The president could easily commute their sentence. He doesn't even have to address the actual innocence, even though we know it's there. He could commute the sentence right now today because they were done wrong and it was unfair. But sometimes it takes a tweet from a Kim Kardashian or somebody with the crazy platform in order to get the attention. Their case is getting more and more traction, but we need people to tweet, tag, and share, because usually what happens is after it gets the attention of a reporter, the New York Times, the Washington Post, those are the political polite indictments that get the attention of those powers that be to act on cases like this. It has become a daunting task, to say the least, to keep up this pace for my office. We've not gotten paid. We're not doing this for money. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do.
Once again, Jared Adams, thank you for coming back on. I appreciate this. I mean, like I said, Jared Adams was wrongfully convicted. He spent 10 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit, and now he is doing God's work. I really appreciate you. Terrence Richardson has been behind bars for over 21 years for a crime that he was found not guilty of, and they still managed to put him behind bars for life. And also Ferrone Claiborne, over 22 years. I'm going to send all the energy. I'm going to make sure I push this story, and hopefully we can get justice sooner than later. Jared Adams, how can folks follow you and support you?
Jared Adams Law. Pick up the book. By buying the book, Redeeming Justice, I'm able to use the funds to help in cases like these. We have a nonprofit as well. If somebody wants to donate their money or their time, because there are way too many cases of this as opposed to lawyers and groups who are doing this, because the resources aren't there. Clay, that's by design. When it comes to doing post-conviction work and trying to prove someone's innocence, it becomes the battle of attrition. That attrition is measured on a stick of resources and stuff like that. Buy the book, support the book, buy a t-shirt, Not Guilty Serving Life. We really want to bring these men home so we can get to the next case of injustice, as well as use their story to implement the laws that prevent and become precedent to prevent these type of injustices from happening. Thank you again, Clay.